Hi,
Hi, Judy.
Leah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to another episode of the Anatomy of Ancestral Alchemy. I am co-host Leah Constance, and
I am Judy Who.
so today we thought that we would do a card pull to help us gain some clarity on what we wanted to talk about today. So we used this deck called Sacred Power, and it's by Anna Stark for any of you that are interested in looking at this further or purchasing it. And we pulled two cards. The first one was intimacy. Give you a close up there. You can see the different elements present in this.
So there's a blue person that I associate water or air, and then someone is red and orange I associate fire with, and they're about to
Hmm.
kiss or connect in some
Yeah,
way.
super close. And then the second one we pulled, which is what would support intimacy. We pulled the rainbow dragon. And so this one at first may not seem as clear as the word intimacy, which we all know very well what that means on some level. And so I'll give you the very short version, and then Judy, you can dive into your thoughts on this and then we can explore. For intimacy, what's so interesting about the guidebook here is that the two first sentences are respect your personal space and nurture your relationships.
Mm.
So I think oftentimes when we think about intimacy, we either one go straight to thinking about physical intimacy, and we don't always think about our own personal space within that right off the bat. So I'm appreciating that this card, the very first line is respect your personal space. And then the rainbow card, the card to help us support intimacy, actually, the main theme here is honesty and being honest with yourself and other people. So, Judy, how do you see intimacy and respecting your own personal space and other people's personal spaces and honesty intersecting?
It's so interesting because it's like I could not have planned more perfect cards as I'm hearing you like recap it because my work is around boundaries. And so I'm pulling on Terry Real's description of intimacy. He's a couples therapist who has some books out, and he describes it sometimes as into me, I see.
Mm.
So I'm going to have, because I have it here, my circles, right? So what I teach my clients and those that I work with is like same size, right? It's like you're in charge of everything in your circle, which is your sense of self, what you want, what you don't want, what you like, what you don't like, what your feelings are, and how to regulate them to figure out what your needs are so you can ask for them in choice, like behavioral choices, right? And so staying in your boundary and inviting another person to stay in their boundary where they're in charge of who they are, what they want, what they don't want, what they like, what they don't like, and then advocating for their own needs using nonviolent communication. So it's, oh my gosh, it's so interesting because it's like my task is I get to see what I want. So it's like minding and respecting my own space and then allowing someone else to see into my boundary, into who I am creates a sense of intimacy. Historically, our society is very much more like this dynamic where there's one central figure or and other people take up a little bit of space. So this dynamic, this power dynamic keeps flipping back and forth, right? And that's the dynamic we actually learn in society. And so the fact that the supporting card for intimacy, which is allowing someone to see into you, and you're in charge of how you perceive your sense of self, right? Not reliant on someone else to validate or which is codependence, right? Is authenticity, essentially. Rainbow Dragon is about being honest, right? And we had another episode at one point that the highest vibration wasn't love, it was authenticity,
Mhm.
honesty,
Yeah.
alignment in your integrity of who you are. And that feels so perfect because if I am respectful of my space and how I'm managing myself, my esteem, how I feel about myself, what I'm looking for, me showing up in my highest vibration, in my full authenticity, gives, allows the other person full consent of whether or not they want to be in a relationship with me, which then when we figure out, okay, we're going to be intimate, we're going to be in relationship, right? This is not just romantic relationships. This is any kind of relationships with friends, with family, with what. And then when you consent, okay, I'm going to be in this relationship, there is a reciprocity that needs to happen to continue the growth and the support of the other. So that's how I perceived it when you read all those things. It was so fun. How's that
I
land for
love
you?
that. Yeah, for sure. And I was also particularly drawn to the colors of your circles because
Mm.
they were that fire and water.
Oh, yes.
I was realizing that was a fun synchronicity.
I didn't even see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about those elementals too, it's making me think about where there could be like some negotiation that needs to happen within
Mm,
intimacy.
say more.
So I was thinking about how if you pour a bunch of water on fire, always nuances here, but if we
Right.
think about how much water can extinguish fire, right? Can
Yep.
just like totally demolish fire. Sometimes there can be inherent power dynamics, right? Like fire actually can't contend with water. If you're thinking of them as equal size circles, water is always going to actually diminish fire in some way, just based on the inherent properties.
Mhm.
And so I was just thinking about that when I'm thinking, I guess I was thinking more about inherent power dynamics within intimate relationships too,
Yeah.
and how to honor those. Yeah, because there can be, based on the structures here, the systems here, right? There can be ways in which one person inherently does hold more power systemically.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that was coming up for me. And yeah, so I guess that's something to be one to be aware of in
Hmm.
relationship. Like where
Yeah.
might you hold power or where might somebody in partnership, whether that's friendship or coworker intimacy or romantic intimacy, where those of us could hold more inherent power. One, awareness, I think. Yeah, awareness is a big one. And secondly, I think being able to name that honestly.
So interesting. I have a physical response to what you just shared. May
Yeah,
I?
please share.
There were two words that are like, you said
Uh-huh.
negotiation
Uh-huh.
and then the power dynamic,
Uh-huh.
which for me is going back to the system in which we have all been raised, which is around power differential and hoarding of resources. When I
Yep.
hear negotiation, it's like, what do I get and what do you get?
Uh-huh.
Which
Uh-huh.
is that power over,
Yeah.
is how I experience it in my body. And
Uh-huh.
then when you're talking about like inherent in this is power dynamics, I was like, oh, I didn't even consider that there was a power dynamic between water and fire. Because
Mm.
I was imagining fire could transform water into air.
Mm.
Boiling it, it was
Interesting.
like actually transformative. So it's not so
Ah,
much like one
yeah.
is going to exist and the other one can't. I was going on
Yeah.
the what if we were all of equal?
Yeah.
I
I
was
love
it's
that,
still in
Judy.
that old that in that frame, not old framework. It's like indigenous framework of diversity is actually a gift to society.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
different elements, these different beings, these different creatures all bring something that the collective needs.
Yeah.
It was just, I was like, oh, I wouldn't have used that word. And then I was like, oh, this is fun. Let's think about it. So it's again back to the whole like, there's nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with you. What's the data?
Mhm.
And there's
Yeah.
no one right way of looking at anything. It's just fun to
Right.
go, oh, that's what happened in me. What happens in you as you
Mhm.
hear me say that now?
It makes me reframe my thought, which is water could dominate fire.
Yes. If imbalanced.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's really, I think, ultimately the situation we face a lot is that inherent power dynamics create coulds.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, when balanced, then
Hmm.
it's transmutable. Yeah.
Yes. Can you say more about inherent power?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about things like a friendship, our friendship, right? I am a white person. I'm
Mm,
fairly white passing. I'm ethnically ambiguous, but I would say there are times where people do wonder if I'm a different race or ethnicity than what I am, but I'm fairly white passing. You are not.
yes.
And so to me, there is an inherent power dynamic in our relationship.
Yes, I see what you mean.
And that is that you are someone that has been historically marginalized because of your race. I have not in the same
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
So the structures and the systems that are present here are not supporting you. That's the way that
Yes.
I see that.
Yes.
And so I have a responsibility to be aware of that. Yeah.
And so concretely, what would that responsibility look like in our relationship?
I think I think actually like just using this podcast and other ways that we've shown up together there are great examples in there, which is one really allowing you to speak your lived experience back to
Yes.
honesty
Yes.
and for me to really give you space around that has felt really important
Hmm.
and being thoughtful about like how my lived experience has been different and so I might have different especially years ago I may have had different opinions or viewpoints or and so I need to be thoughtful about not being dismissive, not
Yes.
judging simply because I've had different experiences than you. So I think in general that shows up in our relationship all the time. When I'm with you in public, I'm much more aware of how people could be treating you. So I feel more attuned to that in some way. There is a protective response that I have, but it's also something that I have to wield.
Yes.
Thankfully, I don't think we've ever been in a position where something like that has shown up when we've been together in public spaces, but I am aware that could happen. So it's something
Hmm.
that's on my mind. Yeah. So I think fire, like water diminishing fire completely would be me dismissing you,
Yes.
right? It would be that's the could that could happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love hearing all these things because it concretizes how I experience our relationship. So, for instance, when you're mindful of hearing my lived experience as true fully, I see you like inviting me into my full side, like making
Mm-hmm.
sure, is that everything? Sometimes you'll be like, is there
Mm-hmm.
more to say? Do you have more? It's literally you not shrinking your size down, but just making sure I show up fully. It's like an
Yeah.
invitation.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm glad that you receive it that way. Yeah.
Which feels very loving,
Yeah.
but
And if we,
not saviorism.
yes, yes. Which is where
It's like
sometimes the
trusting.
protective nature can
Yes.
be that savior. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so sweet. And it reminds me of sometimes being in relationships with people when I share my experience and they say things like, have you considered this? Or maybe that wasn't really what they meant. And
Hmm.
I can understand why, right? They're trying to save me from my hurt feelings and lands in my marginalized body as
Hmm.
dismissiveness, or like I'm
Yeah.
making it bigger than it actually is, or yeah,
Yeah. And to your phrase, taking up space, to me, that's air. That's the
interesting. Say more.
transformative
Mm.
property that you were describing before.
Mm.
Of like how like when in healthy balance, harmonious balance, water meets fire, it's transformed into air. Yeah. It's not just killed. Yeah.
And that's a space between, like in relationships, right? It's like we create something completely different within the relationship by how we interact. Now there's a third circle, which is the relationship. It's this
Hmm.
co-creation that we have, for a case in point, this podcast.
Right.
Where I get to show up in my authenticity, you get to show up in your authenticity, and then we create this third thing
Mm-hmm.
that we're nurturing, we're feeding by showing up for it, whether it's this
Yeah.
podcast or our friendship.
Yeah. I'm really appreciative of your reflection on that very much. I love that we can create air. It's
I know
so
it's so fun because it's also,
good.
let's see what happens, right? It's
Mhm.
interesting. I was feeling so much grief today about whatever, all the stuff that's happening in the world. That's why we started our podcast off with, let's pull some cards. There's so many options of what we talk about. The grief I was feeling about was lack of intimacy, like loss of actual authentic relationships. Like I was missing
Mm,
my dad essentially this morning. I was taking care of
mhm.
my kids, making them breakfast, and I just was at a point of I miss someone taking care of me as
Yeah.
though they were my parent.
Yeah.
And it makes me think what a gift it has been, Leah, to be able to have this level of intimacy with you in our friendship, in our collaboration.
Mhm.
And it makes me sad because I don't actually know. This might be a question to the viewers or the listeners if they've experienced this level of intimacy in their lives.
Yeah. 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 I know from my own life, it's had to have been cultivated
Mm.
over many years. Yeah, I don't think it was like when I think about how messy friendships were in adolescence, when I think about the intensity of, I'm just thinking of word associations here, like the intensity of relationships in my early 20s. I really feel like it wasn't until like my mid 30s that I really felt like I was starting to gain connections that felt much more intimate and authentic and honest. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know when I started?
When?
2 years ago
Uh-huh. Yeah.
at 48,
Yeah.
because I was never authentic. I
Mhm.
never felt safe enough to be fully who I was.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I couldn't even be intimate with myself because I couldn't show up fully as myself in any relationship, especially the relationship with myself.
Yeah. And what do you feel like had the most impact on that for you?
Of allowing it.
Of both, yeah, what was the learning process for you and what barriers were there? And then what do you think
Mm.
was most supportive?
I think that originating trauma for me that prevented any type of authenticity at all
Mhm.
was having a critical parent whose connection was contingent on my how I showed up, essentially my performance.
Yeah.
So our how I understand boundaries now is our boundaries are informed by the relationships with our primary caregivers. So I was either very porous, right? So if this were me, the red circle, and someone else was a blue circle, I would literally disappear into the relationship. I would be so porous. I would become exactly who they wanted me to be because that's exactly what I did in my relationship with my parent.
Yeah.
To please her, I became who she needed me to be. I
Hmm.
became the projection that she needed me to be. So I just transferred that into my quote unquote intimate relationships, which weren't intimate. They were just me performing. And then the natural adaptation to that was because I was always betraying my sense of self, which I didn't even know what that was, is then I would become anti-dependent, which is having such a rigid boundary, I would not allow anyone in. It bounces back and forth between porosity or codependence or rigidity, which is anti-dependence. And that is what I've seen is the bulk of how people show up in the world.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. It's like the counterbalance. Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what do you think helped?
Suicidal ideation.
It has a place.
It
Say
does.
more. Say more.
Suffering has such value, so much value. I remember I had a best friend at the time who kept trying to soothe me, and in her soothing, prolonged this experience of self-hatred. And so thankfully, she withdrew her relationship, which fulfilled this fantasy, this fear that if I was myself, then I would lose connection. But what happened was because she was no longer there, this codependent relationship, right? Basically, essentially my mother. I had to, or I didn't have to. I chose to then attach to myself because the only other option that I knew was to not be present. I would just become whoever the other person wanted me to be. But that meant that eventually I would prefer being dead than being
Mhm.
alive because I didn't know who I was. I wasn't honest with myself.
Yeah.
So, because the pain was too great, I actually did the work that I needed to be who I was. And that meant I had to remove myself from relationships that were, in my mind, suffocating me. But it
Yeah.
wasn't they were suffocating me. I was the one suffocating me because I had the preconceived notion of how I needed to show up in that relationship. So, as a
Mhm.
wife, I needed to support my husband fully in his dreams. And as a mother, I needed to support my children in their dreams.
Yeah.
But essentially, I couldn't exist in those relationships.
Yeah. There's another element showing up here.
What? Tell me.
Earth.
Say more.
I was thinking of the phrase when you were talking about suicidality and suffering. I was thinking about the phrase rock bottom.
Yes. Yes.
And it's interesting, and this with all the compassion in my heart, because I have been there with you as a teenager. I was really experiencing a lot of suicidal ideation. And the word humble is coming up, and let me explain why. So, the etymology of humility and humble is really interesting. So, it comes from the word humus, which means
Mm,
earth or like dirt. And I know, isn't that mind blowing? It's yeah. And so if we just think about it purely elemental without judgment, it means
mhm,
earth, like
mhm,
those who walk the earth, those who lay with the earth. And so when I think about that, sometimes I think suffering drops us in a way where it's like, what do we like to your point, Judy, what okay, there's a part of me that still wants to be here, even if all the other parts of me don't want to be on this earthly plane anymore. There's a part of me that does. And so I'm going to honor that. And what do I need to do to take a step forward
mm,
on this earth? Yeah. What healing am I ready for? Yeah. Yeah. So to me, there's earth. And so I think those moments can be humbling. That was the way that it was coming through, is that they can be humbling and
yeah.
reground us in next course of action. Yeah. How does that land?
I'm sitting with this of the land. So I've been on this, I'm still integrating. So the last call the podcast we did was around the weekend intensive that we were part of together. And I've just been digesting so much of it. And something that came up in the group today is we are of this land. Human beings are of this land. What do I mean? That part of the reason why so many people are sick, quote unquote, or unwell, or having mental health issues is because the way the society is set up
Yeah.
makes us so ill because
Yeah.
we're not in right connection. We're not in right
Mhm.
relationship. We're not intimate with ourselves and each other, right? So, one of the ways that we've been robbed by settler colonialism and the remnants of that is we were disconnected as humans from our bodies and the limits within our bodies and the land.
Yeah.
So when we cannot be in relationship to our bodies, like going, I am tired and I don't want to work anymore, and our body and our, the driver, the brain is, okay, we won't work anymore. versus
Yeah.
how we've been trained to ignore the symptoms of our body and go, but there's a deadline. And if we don't make the deadline, we're going to get fired. And if we're fired, we're not going to be able to bring food for our children or whatever, right? That
Mm-hmm.
fear that's been instilled by these systems of oppression have disconnected us from the wisdom of our bodies and the wisdom of the land
Yes.
and that relationship that we can have at all times.
Yes. And particularly poignant that you're bringing that up today because yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day here.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting, like when I think about the word depression, which we often, at least really deep depression and suicidality are attached,
Yes.
I think of the phrase deep rest, depressed and deep rest, like how much we need that during that time. And I just had this image of somebody like literally laying in a shallow grave.
Yes.
They're not covered, they're still alive, but laying in a shallow grave in that liminal space. And it's interesting. I'm not quite sure why I'm like feeling, let me feel into that image a little bit more. I think for me, it circles back to what you just said around like how much is depression a symptom of the disconnection from land?
Yes.
And depression, literally, for a lot of us, plants us right back on the earth, right?
Yes.
Yeah. There were days where I just wanted to lay on the ground and not move.
And I love the imagery of the liminal space between death, so the 7 feet under, versus and like just right on top of the ground,
Yeah.
because there's a choice. Do I stay with the living or do I go with the dead? Right. So for me, chronic depression, it was like this thing that I had to manage all the time. And the reason why I had chronic depression was because the thinking stayed the same.
Mhm.
And so for me, how I understand depression too is anger turned inside. So I always perceived, because of how I was raised and the epigenetic impact of collective trauma in my body, I perceived there was something wrong with me. So it was constantly the self-criticism that made people miserable. As I connected my existence and I attached it to my mother's misery.
Yeah.
And so I kept having so much anger turned inwards. And so the chronic depression was chronic because I never changed the thinking.
Yeah. Mm. And is there anything that you feel like supported you in taking the first step around the thinking?
I think it had to do with understanding how what I thought was me was actually not me. So part of it was understanding. And this is like when I was a clinician, I was still having
Mhm.
suicidal ideation. Like just
Mhm.
only a few years ago
Mhm.
did I stop
Yep.
because I perceived there was something innately wrong with me. What was actually the case, though, there was something wrong with who I thought I was. It wasn't who I was.
Yeah.
My personality was all an adaptation to trauma. The perfectionism, the people pleasing, the anxiety, the ways that I showed up in the world were directly a result of unprocessed collective trauma from my ancestors embodied in me. So, in understanding, oh, that's not my personality. That's what I developed into what I thought was my personality because it was required for survival of my people.
Yeah. Right.
When I understood that and actually provided enough safe space for me to become who I really am, that's when the transformation happened.
I'm curious, how does your body feel as you name that?
I feel alive.
Yeah.
There's like sadness behind my eyes that it took so long. And
Mhm.
there's energy in my hands and my heart's warm because oh, thank fucking God I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God you did it. And
Mhm.
here you are. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting thinking elementally about the time I was very depressed too. And I think also to tie it back to intimacy, I just want to name so much of what we're talking about is also intimacy with ourselves, right? Being honest with
Yes,
ourselves.
100%.
Yeah, and I think for me, what's interesting is I think I was contending a lot with toxic thought forms growing up,
Mm,
external from myself. And I didn't know there were definitely thought forms that were internal. There was a lot for me around my physical body and feeling overweight a lot of the time or differently shaped than a lot of people I was around, or there was definitely a lot of that. And I think I internalized a lot of like toxic masculinity. And then I think there were other thought forms that were really difficult for me. And it just felt, yeah, it just felt very depressing to feel the amount of oppression around me.
yes,
And for me, it actually took moving to a different land to feel the energy of what it was like to be around different thought forms.
interesting.
So I literally, my junior year of high school, I went and lived with my aunt in St. Louis, and it was completely life-changing for me. And a big part of that, I think, was because I was exposed to things that felt much more aligned for my soul and thought forms that felt much kinder and more thoughtful and more inclusive. Art was also a lot more accessible for me than it was at home. So I had the vehicle of expression. Yeah. So it's interesting because I think of thought forms, collective thought forms, as being air. They're like these thought clouds that float around us, and they are attached to certain geographical places at times.
Can you say
And
more
so,
about that?
yeah, like when I think about, so I grew up in West Virginia. West Virginia is now a very conservative state. It was not in the early 80s. It was actually Democratic. It's a very interesting exploration. We also, during the Civil War, were the state that did not want slavery. We wanted to end it and abolish it, which a lot of people do not realize
Interesting.
because of how conservative it is now. But the county I actually grew up in changed hands. So Union versus um, Confederate changed hands 52 times during the Civil War. That was the
What?
amount of like tension that was held in that county. And it's right on the Virginia border. That's why.
Ah,
So think about the type of energy that that land and the thought forms that land holds. It's like
mhm.
there was a lot of blatant racism, a lot of blatant sexism, a lot of people that, for whatever reason, either didn't want to or didn't have a chance to leave. A lot of white-bodied exploitation. West Virginia has a very unique history of resources being exploited there. And unique meaning differently than the ways that other states have been exploited here because it's all mountains and all trees. I think for me, I really needed to move to a place that had a more progressive ideology to feel like, oh, this is actually like one thing that can create liberation is to move, literally. Like that is an
Mhm.
option. And I could literally feel that. I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so different for me. Yeah. 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 It's fascinating to think about. I'm still trying to piece that together to make sense of it at all. I'm sure I will be thinking about that for my entire life.
There's a type of astrology that helps people figure out the locations that are best for their sign, right? Or their based
Yeah.
on their date of birth and stuff.
Yeah. Astrocartography.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to name something around the land and
Mhm.
something that keeps coming up in the constellations work that I'm doing with my clients is Land has memory of its people.
Yes.
So, one of the constellations that I did recently was around enslavement and bringing in the continent of Africa. Historically, when I've done this exploration before, the land will miss its people, whether they were stolen or they migrated, like Ireland, because they had to, because of the forced famine that was there.
Yeah.
That when the children, when the people come back, there's almost this like re embrace or this reconnection to the motherland, that the motherland misses its children when they have to leave. It's that connection, that intimacy that I just keep think of it in another way.
Yeah. And I think that's why when I go home, there are people there, thankfully, I do have good relationships with still, and I connect with when I go back. And ultimately, it is the land that holds me when I'm there.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I feel that every time.
Mm,
Yeah. It's interesting because honestly, it's if I'd had the very open, compassionate, exploratory experience interpersonally that I'd had in St. Louis in the mountains of West Virginia, I would have been so content.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was limited by the people who lived there and
Mhm.
their experiences.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Like I'm thinking about, like for me, I needed to leave my family of origin to
Right.
survive, to literally to be able to live, not because they were bad, but because the ways that they thought, their thought forms and the ways that they needed to be in the world was so, for me, toxic in my body. So removing myself from that system actually allowed me to find some space to create,
Yes.
just to unfold, to be who I thought I was meant to be.
Yeah.
So, what is the alchemy we can offer to our listeners based on this conversation, Leah?
Just thinking about the elements we've named. So we've named water, fire, air, earth. Spirit's interesting. I'm like, I wonder if it fits in as some alchemy here. And I think
Mm,
to some degree it does. Yeah. When I think about spirit of land, spirits of the land, the spirit of place, the way that spirit lives within, I think about intuition and knowing.
mm,
It's like, even though I had a really hard time deciding, I knew that I needed to go to St. Louis for a year, even as a 16-year-old.
wow.
There was a knowing for you at some point, I'm assuming, of distancing myself from family is the best thing for me. So I think spirit can fit into that alchemization of this in some way. What about for you? What comes up for you when you think about alchemizing?
I agree. And so it's like spirit, it's like for everyone who's listening, replace it with higher being or whatever. So don't get so caught up in the words, right? Or replace it. There's a Rolodex in everyone's head. Find the word or thing that makes you feel more expansive, more grounded, more embodied, more free, and then go with that word. And so for me, I think the moments that I feel most expansive and most embodied or able to be intimate and authentic is when I feel held and loved unconditionally. So that's been my practice of like maturing this functional adult or this internal higher power is when I connect myself to my body, when I connect myself back to the land, I can be intimate with people and show up in my full authenticity because my sense of safety and belonging no longer requires anyone's invitation, appreciation, acceptance, approval, nothing. Because I connect I'm here for a reason and it's
Yeah.
not to please anybody,
Yeah.
it's to live. And I don't need to justify my existence anymore because I'm not trying to get approval. I grant it to myself. And so that
Mhm.
is my connection to my own inner knowing, spirit, higher self, whatever. But that's what keeps me really grounded. It's if I can trust that the planet is going to survive beyond the harm that we do, which I trust. There's
Mhm.
such a wisdom in this planet, then I can trust that I'm here for a reason.
Yeah, I love that. What a beautiful place to end. And I think ultimately that's what honesty and intimacy does. It builds trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To hang in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With ourselves, with other people. Yeah.
100%. Don't
Yeah.
shrink them down or exile anybody, right? Everyone
Mhm.
has a right to be on this planet.
Yeah.
Just maybe not in close proximity to me or you or but it's about finding where your place is on the planet. And everyone has a right to exist here. As long as you're not hoarding resources, as long as you're not hurting anybody, you have a right to exist here on this planet that has enough for everyone. So find
Thank you.
where you feel resonance, find where you feel you can be seen and loved and appreciated for who you are, and hold yourself there.
A fucking men. That's how I'm gonna end that today. A fucking
Fucking
men.
men.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, everyone else.
Thanks, everybody.
Take good care.